Hello, HR of Tomorrow attendees. My name is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. Coming from Oakland, California in the United States, and you are at the workshop, Dudes Do Better, Dismantling Toxic Masculinity in the Workplace. I'm so happy and excited to get into this, so let's just dive in right now. So this is what we're actually going to be covering today in this workshop. Not only are we going to be talking about dismantling toxic masculinity in the workplace, but we're also going to be delving into its impacts over these past 2 years, both during the pandemic and the Great Resignation. We're also going to be addressing the myth around toxic masculine leadership. We're also going to explore the balance of feminine and masculine leadership and how we can potentially incorporate that or infuse that into staff that is coming up nowadays. And then finally, we're going to address and explore and provide solutions for how to dismantle toxic masculinity, whether you're at the entry level, middle management, or at the C-suite level. So I believe that toxic masculine leadership drove the Great Resignation. You don't believe me? Let me prove it to you. Let me first define what I mean by toxic masculinity. I define toxic masculinity as a narrow and repressive description of manhood, designating being a man as defined by dominance, aggression, individualism, and a lack of emotion. So here are some of the traits that I want you to look for as we start to explore the Great Resignation. Bullying, that's a huge trait. Avoiding losing at all costs, restraining one's emotions, showing strength through aggression in moments of conflict, like the Great Resignation and the pandemic, and exhibiting dominance, masking insecurity. So just to paint you a picture of what was going on in the United States around the Great Resignation, let me just give you some glimpses of what was going on here, right? So certain companies, such as Tesla and other organizations, were actually bullying and forcing staff to go back to work before there was a vaccine. And some companies expected staff to go back to work after some of their colleagues had just died at work. We had other organizations like John Deere and Facebook where they felt so exploited or abused that they felt they needed to either put together petitions, strike, or potentially unionize just to address all of the issues that they currently had with how leadership was treating them. There were other companies that decided during that time that the government money that they had just received, instead of using it to pay employees and rehire them, they used it to buy back stock to reward their investors or to reward their executives with higher bonuses. And then we also had some companies, such as airline companies, complain about how they had to fire staff or let go of tens of thousands of staff, only to find out later on they couldn't find any staff to hire, so they had to cancel flights, and they blamed it on people being lazy. And then finally, we have, essential workers that were clearly taken for granted, whether they were healthcare workers or, grocery workers, and they felt completely exploited. And some companies were even breaking the law in how they laid off staff and how they interacted with staff during the pandemic, as well as also during the Great Resignation. So what did that result in 2021? That resulted in not only people feeling as if they were being treated as expendable, exploited, and feeling used, but also it showed the true colors of many of these companies. And that resulted in 47.4 million people voluntarily quitting their jobs in the US alone just in 2021. Now, we're not even talking about 2020, just in 2021. And voluntary is a key word because that means that the companies didn't lay them off. The companies weren't going through financial hardship. That employee was just fed up and had enough and just quit. So that just paints the current picture we're in. Did this also have an effect on Europe? A little bit, at least. From the brief research that I found, that even some places in the UK, a third of their workers were even considering a career change in 2022. So we have to realize where we're currently at and not be afraid to talk about the Great Resignation, as I find a lot of HR and a lot of companies don't even want to say those words. But if we're not really willing to address the problems beneath it, we're not going to be able to really handle the issue that's in front of us. So why am I talking about dismantling toxic masculinity as a man? Because I'm a guy. And in many ways, we are the ones that created this problem. So it is actually our mess to clean up. We have asked women to lean in and power pose and be assertive but not aggressive, and do all these things to adapt to toxic masculine leadership. And us men as allies, we are the problem, so we need to actually address it. We are the culprits here. And as long as we have only women trying to address this, we're never going to actually deal with it. It's just going to continue to fester in a variety of ways. So we need to own what is our responsibility in actually dismantling toxic masculine leadership in the workplace. So who am I? Again, as I said, my name is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. But before I did all of this, I wanted to be a toy designer. Why? Because I saw the movie Big when I was a kid with Tom Hanks, and he played with toys for a living in that movie. And I was like, you can do that for a living? Oh my goodness, I need to do that. So I started writing toy companies in 3rd grade, and I did not stop until I got into the toy industry. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you got there, but this is how it felt. It was just cubicles for days, no fun, no high fives, no joy. And then in addition to that, it was a toxic masculine work environment, an old boys club. It was very competitive. There was bullying that I actually saw. Everyone was focused on themselves. No one was watching out for each other. It was very focused on individual merit and individualism. And it really wasn't about the team. So it didn't foster a community that I actually wanted to be a part of. So I ended up quitting pretty quickly, just like many Gen Zers are quitting in their early 20s because they're so disenchanted with what they thought work could possibly be. So I eventually left New York, came to California, and I helped to build out a educational company, and it ended up becoming the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the US. And we did it not through the standard ways of leadership, not through the standard masculine ways of leadership. We actually had no business plan. We just played around and experimented. We followed our intuition. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people that we thought were fun. We prioritized relationships over short-term profits. A lot of times we were just trying to see how much fun we could have. We followed our curiosity and we focused on inspiring staff instead of controlling staff. And only later on, as I reflect back at it now that I'm at Rediscover Your Play, is I found that we were actually modeling many of the feminine leadership traits that actually drive success. And it just blew my mind because I was like, how come not other companies are doing this? If these have been proven to work, why are more companies not adopting those? So we have to explore what is the myth of toxic masculine leadership. But a lot of people are going to be like, this seems like an anti-men workshop. I don't know about this. I feel a problem with this. And I'm not talking about men. What I'm talking about is toxic masculine leaders. So many different people can exhibit toxic masculine leadership traits, whether you're Jeff Bezos or Elizabeth Holmes. Both of them were highly secretive. Both of them created internal competition and toxicity. So anyone, whether you're a male, man, woman, trans, anyone can exhibit those traits. So we need to be able to call out those traits and point out that they're not effective. There's also this myth that toxic masculine leaders get the job done, that they produce the highest profits, that they're always doing amazing things. And frankly, that's just not true. The data does not merit this. And frankly, the data doesn't lie. Companies with women in leadership positions are more profitable than ones without. Looking at this study from 1997 to 2017, we found that directors as well as executive officers, when you have female staff, much more profitable. In addition to that, this just came out from Statista this year, right in March, is that only 15% of CEOs are women. Yet 41 of the most successful Fortune 500 companies currently are run by women. So what are we doing? The data communicates that we need a more diverse leadership staff, and we currently are not fulfilling that, and we're losing money and being less successful because of this. The reality is that toxic masculine leadership is not just not bringing you more profits, it's actually costing you billions. SHRM did a study back in 2019 before the pandemic that found that companies were losing $223 billion over the last 5 years due to a toxic leadership. Gallup found even a more disturbing study that found that the estimated of active disengagement from toxic bosses cost U.S. companies $450 to $500 billion per year. So we're talking about real money, right? And then if you want to get micro, how much is that costing actually just one company? If we're just analyzing a U.S. company, we found that lost revenue due to a toxic leader, it cost $14,000 in productivity per employee. So think about that leader running a team. Think about 10 staff currently there. It's $140,000 just alone right there. The cost to recruit and train new staff, SHRM study found that is 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary to replace them. So we're talking about $30,000 to $45,000 for someone that's getting paid $60,000 a year. Imagine your higher level executives or higher level staff that are getting paid 6 figures. How much is that costing to replace them? And then we haven't even spoken about the idea of lawsuits, because eventually with many toxic people, a lawsuit comes out, whether it's discriminatory or sexual harassment or firing without cause, they're going to make it a mistake. And that typically costs between $75,000 to $150,000, at least in the US, to defend this. And this does not calculate how much you also have to settle for. This is just litigation and the background that they have to do to defend. So this is costing companies significant amounts of money. Why are we doing this if we're hemorrhaging so much money? So let's look at what actual successful leadership might look like going forward as we determine the future of work. It's where we can actually find a balance between feminine and masculine leadership. Yes, profitability is very important, but sustainability is just as important. Yes, we can actually analyze and use reason to explore how to solve certain problems, but we should also give our staff the freedom and the ability to follow their intuition to solve certain issues. Yes, it's important to have competition from time to time, but not internal competition. We should be much more collaborative with it, because that creates a community, and a community is where people want to stay. And we got to be careful not to be so controlling and commanding of our staff, and focus more on coaching them and inspiring them. These are just some of the aspects of feminine leadership traits that we need to embrace more, because we've leaned so far towards masculine that we've gotten into a toxic situation. So who are examples of a balanced form of leadership? Let's go across the pond to New Zealand, where we have Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, who said this: one of the criticisms I've faced over the years is that I'm not aggressive enough or assertive enough, or maybe somehow because I'm empathetic, I'm weak. I totally rebel against that. I refuse to believe that you cannot be both compassionate and strong. Her compassionate and strong leadership led to the lowest COVID rates of any country in the world, as well as the lowest COVID deaths. Saving lives by simply finding an ability to balance masculine and feminine leadership. That's just one example. Going to the opposite side of the pond to Seattle, Washington, we find Dan Price, who became famous for making a minimum wage of $70,000 a year for his company, Gravity Payments, for his staff. He says, since my company started a $70K minimum wage in 2015, staff having kids soared 10 times. Virtually zero companies followed suit. So just first notice what he's measuring. He's measuring something much more holistic than just how much productivity I can get out of my staff. Also, he is showing that he has his staff's back. So when the pandemic hit, Gravity Payments did not have to lay off any staff. In fact, all staff were willing to take pay cuts because they remembered Dan Price and the leadership team getting their back. So now they were willing to get Dan's back. Right now, during the Great Resignation, they're not struggling to find staff. They're getting applications all the time. Why? Because they're willing to pay a livable wage, and because their staff and their leadership are showing that they're willing to show up with both feminine and masculine leadership. So where do we begin? How do we address these issues? We have to recognize the power dynamics that currently exist. Having said that, whether you're an entry level or C-suite, you do have agency, you do have power. So let's explore how we can actually dismantle it from different levels. So from an entry and junior level staff standpoint, I would just simply start with finding allies and employees who have similar issues. So there's certain people that are causing amok, are running amok, and start to find out, am I the only one that is concerned about this? Maybe I am only one, but test that out. Find other people and start building a community that also agrees that this issue needs to be addressed. While you're finding these allies, employees, you'll find that you're going to start to gather data and documentation and reports on these toxic staffers. And that information is vital. A lot of times we focus on, oh, well, this person hurt my feelings. But when you actually have data and stories and documentation and it's written out, then you can actually go to leadership. Then you could actually go to HR and be like, these are the issues that are actually coming up. And this is why it's costing our team a ton of money in regards to productivity as well as turnover. And then you have to recognize the leverage and access that you have. You have more leverage than you ever have in the history of work. Because of the Great Resignation, there's so many other jobs out there. Your company wants you to stay. So use that leverage and the fact that understand the value you bring to the organization and also recognize the access that you have. You have access to everyone on the ground level. You know what's going on with the pulse of the organization, many times more so than leadership, because you're talking to people that are also on the ground, doing the work, doing a lot of the real work. So remember, you have agency and you have power, so leverage that. For mid-level managers, I know this is a tough situation. You get crapped on from the top, you get complaints from the bottom, you feel stuck in the middle, but you also still have a certain level of agency and power. So let's explore what you can do. I would first say, investigate why staff have left. Go back to those exit interviews. If you can reach out to former staff and talk to them off the record, even better. Then I would also talk to your staff. How did your company do during the pandemic? Did you lose trust or gain trust with your employees during that time? Ask that question. If you can't ask that question of your staff because you haven't built that trust, then you need to start figuring out how you're going to actually start building connection so you can have those difficult conversations. These are the open-ended conversations of lifting the veil so we can address more important issues. But you have to be able to build trust to have these real conversations with your staff, or these issues are just going to continue to fester. And then you also have to understand what is within your circle of influence. Yes, other departments might be toxic. Yes, other leadership might be, but your team doesn't have to be. Why don't you start experimenting with new ways of leading where it's much more collaborative, where you're looking out for one another, where you're allowing people to follow their intuition and play and do the work that makes them come most alive, right? And drive them that way, inspire and coach them, and see what comes out. You might find that you're retaining more employees and you're more productive and more profitable. And then you can point to your team and be like, hey, other departments, this is what we're doing and it's working out. You might want to implement some of these actions. And then for the executive and C-suite level, you got to take responsibility. You got to find out what is the worst behavior you are currently tolerating, and you need to address it. Why are you allowing that person to run amok? Either fire that person or put them on a performance improvement plan, but you need to address that individual or multiple individuals, because as long as they act out, they are giving permission for everyone else to do the same. And you're showing a lack of respect to all the other workers. Why do they need to work so hard if Chad is not working hard at all? So we need to address that, and you need to nip that in the bud immediately if you really want to address this. Then thinking long-term, you need to reassess what metrics you are using to measure success by. Is it more important right now to hit quarterly profits, or more important to have employee retention? You can't make profits if you don't have the staff to do it. So we really have to be thinking about more sustainable metrics, which actually match up more with feminine leadership traits. And then finally, you need to start funding communities, affinity groups, and employee resource groups, ERGs, that actually support and provide an opportunity, an avenue for people that may not feel heard currently with their team or currently with HR, but they feel heard within these committees. Right? So whether they're focused on DEI or they're focused on, helping to promote more women to higher leadership roles, whatever those committees are, you need to start putting some money behind that and put your money where your mouth is and show, hey, we want to support these groups so people feel they belong, they feel seen, and they feel heard. And then finally, as a society, we need to start addressing, why are we celebrating toxic masculine leaders? Right now, there are 3 series out that are celebrating WeWork, celebrating Elizabeth Holmes, as well as the person from Uber. Yes, it also shows them, coming apart at the end, but people still don't remember that. They still love to watch that, and we're deifying these toxic masculine leaders. I know finance guys who watch The Wolf of Wall Street and see that guy as a hero, even though he went to jail. As long as we continue to deify this stuff, we're going to have this issue. We are currently really at a crossroads where we have to determine what type of leadership do we want going forward. Do we want pre-pandemic leadership that is built around bullying, that's built around individualism, that's built around every person for themselves? Or are we finally ready to embrace a post-pandemic leadership that is built off shared humanity, compassion, and empathy in the workplace, as well as collaboration, and this willingness to play and following your intuition? That's the choice that you have every day in every small decision that you make, so that we can actually create a future of work that people actually want to go to. That is my talk. I hope this was super helpful for you. I have actually added this Rediscover Your Play HR of Tomorrow 2022. It is a link I have just wrote an article that is going to be published in the next couple of days for the Rosie Report, and I'll be releasing that. And that actually summarizes much of what we talked about here, but actually goes into even more detail in the article. If you would like access to the article, simply go to this website and just fill in your information there. And now I'm open to any questions that you may have.